In this lesson, we'll take a look at the blood flow of the pulmonary circuit, and then we'll introduce the blood flow of the systemic circuit. However, the actual arteries and veins of the systemic circuit we will do in subsequent lessons. So before I talk about the actual pulmonary circuit, I want to go over just three general functional patterns of both arteries and veins. First of all, when you study arteries and veins, the blood vessels on the left side of the body, right, for the most part, are symmetrical to the blood vessels on the right side of the body, right? All of your arteries and veins in your left upper limb are the same as your right upper limb. The only place that we see differences is near the heart. Right? There are other exceptions, and I'll point them out in other lessons. But you'll see that near the heart, the blood vessels come off asymmetrically, but eventually things divide and become symmetrical. Now, one long blood vessel could have different names depending on where it is in the body. For instance, if you took your left hand and put it over your right clavicle for a moment, underneath your hand there's a big blood vessel there called the subclavian artery, right? Sub means under, clavian means the clavicle, right? That same artery, if you kind of follow down, go to your axilla, that same artery now extends to your armpit. We're going to change the name to the axillary artery. Then move your arm down to the medial, I'm sorry, move your hand down to the medial arm. That same blood vessel is now going to be called the brachial artery, right? So we have one tube, but based on where you are, we change the name. I'm going to point that out as we go through these different blood vessels. Uh, Tissues and organs usually have more than one blood supply, right? We're going to see that the stomach has many blood vessels going into it, the esophagus, right? So God forbid one blood vessel became clogged or blocked or damaged, the other blood vessels can bring blood flow to that organ. And then we're also going to see that sometimes blood vessels may become interconnected, right? Two arteries may connect to one another, or an artery or a vein, or two veins. That connection for now, I just want you to know, is called an anastomosis, right? I'll point out some examples of that again in subsequent lessons. So let's take a look at the pulmonary circuit first. So if we look at the right side of the heart, just as a review, this is the right atrium, tricuspid valve, right ventricle, right? Left atrium, mitral valve, left ventricle. If you notice on the right side of the heart, they painted the blood blue, which means that it has deoxygenated blood in it, low levels of oxygen, right? It doesn't look blue, it's just the way we represent it on a diagram. So what the right side of the heart has to do is push the blood to the left and the right lungs. Their gas exchange will take place, and then the lungs will send the blood back to the left side of the heart. That blood flow from the right side of the heart to the lungs and then back to the left side of the heart is the pulmonary circuit. All right, that's what we're going to go over now. So deoxygenated blood is going to pass from the right atrium down to the right ventricle, right? Obviously, we know it goes through the tricuspid valve. Once the blood is in the right ventricle, it's going to enter a big blood vessel known as the pulmonary trunk. And the way it gets into the pulmonary trunk is by going through a valve known as the pulmonary valve. So let's go over what we just said. Right atrium, the blood will go down through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Now the right ventricle contracts, it's going to push the blood through this valve right here. That is the pulmonary valve. Right? Sometimes people call it the pulmonary semilunar valve. Once that valve opens, the blood goes into this blood vessel right here. It's pretty thick. It's a pretty big blood vessel, right? Big diameter, I should say. This is the pulmonary trunk. Just so you know, whenever you hear the word trunk, it means the blood vessel is going to split. So at this point, the pulmonary trunk splits into the right pulmonary artery, which runs under here, and the left pulmonary artery right there, which is going to run to the left lung. Okay, so once the blood enters the pulmonary trunk after passing through the pulmonary valve, the pulmonary trunk, again, a trunk tells you it's going to divide, is going to go into the pulmonary arteries. Now, the pulmonary arteries in the lungs get smaller and smaller and smaller until they become microscopic, and then we call them the pulmonary arterioles, and they're going to feed blood to the capillaries that surround the alveoli. So here what they're showing you guys are the pulmonary arterioles going around the air sacs. This represents an air sac right here. We'll do this when we do the respiratory system. And here's a capillary outside or just around the air sac. Notice oxygen from the lung is going to go into the blood vessel. Carbon dioxide is going to go out, and this is what we breathe out. All right, so at this point in the lung we have gas exchange. Before I go back to the notes. So now we have oxygenated blood. So notice we're going to put the blood now in these red blood vessels to show that these are oxygenated. These are going to be the pulmonary veins. Veins carry blood back to the heart. So notice the pulmonary veins are going to bring the oxygenated blood back to the left atrium. Right? And then it's going to go down into the left ventricle. Right, so just kind of going back to the notes, right, the pulmonary arterioles, which are microscopic, they're going to feed blood into the capillary blood vessels that surround the alveoli. At that point, gas exchange is going to take place. Carbon dioxide comes out of the blood and oxygen is added to the blood, right? That's the main thing that's happening in the lung. So now the blood vessels have oxygen in them. They got to flow back to the heart. So these capillary networks around the alveoli are going to become venules. If you remember from our previous lesson, venules are microscopic veins. These venules coalesce, right? They combine to form the pulmonary veins, and these carry oxygenated blood back to the left side of the heart, the left atrium. Okay, so again, if you noticed before, everything was blue. The pulmonary trunk was blue, the pulmonary arteries were blue, showing us that these had low levels of oxygen in the blood. But now the blood returning back to the heart on the left side, they're painted red because they are high in oxygen. Now we have oxygenated blood back in the left atrium. From there, it's going to go through the mitral valve down into the left ventricle. Okay, that blood flow that we just did is the pulmonary circulation. From the left ventricle, we are now going to enter the systemic circuit. Notice, guys, this is where most of the blood is, right? 84% of the blood in our body is in the systemic circuit, right? It's feeding all the organs and tissues of the body, right? It supplies the entire body except for the pulmonary circuit. So from the left ventricle, the blood is going to enter the ascending aorta. And I'll see if I can show you this here. So now we have this oxygenated blood here. From here, the blood is going to go into this blood vessel here. This is the ascending aorta, and the aorta, which we're going to study in the next lesson, is going to feed blood all throughout the body, right? It's going to go up to the brain, into the arms, into the chest organs, the abdominal organs, the legs, that type of thing. Okay, and that's going to be what we're going to do in subsequent lessons. We'll take a look at all the arteries and veins of the systemic circuit. Okay, so that concludes this lesson on the pulmonary circuit and just a brief introduction into the systemic circuit, which we'll pick up now on future lessons.